Stan?
My full name is StanleyHaines.
And when were you born?
I was born the 14th of August 1927.
And where was that?
I was born in Tilkey Road, about 200 yards from this house. I've not been very ambitious as far as moving.
And your mum and dad were still alive?
My mum and dad were still alive when I was born, yes. My father didn't die till I was 9. He died as a result of...
What did he used to do?
He was a building worker, and he was a Berkshire man, and he'd come out of the army after the First World War, and he'd come down to work at Chelmsford. Whilst he worked at Chelmsford, Silver End was being built, Silver End village, and he went there to work, and that was while he was there that he met my mum. And after they'd courted for a little while, they were married, and they were married in Coggeshall, in St Peter's Church in Coggeshall. Oh. Yeah.
And what about your grandparents? Do you remember them?
Yeah, I remember I don't remember my grandfather. My grandfather died the year I was born, 1927. But I very much remember my grandmother. After my father died, we lived about 100 yards from my grandma's house, and my mother came from a large family. There was a family of 14 brothers and sisters, and so there was always plenty of uncles and aunts to indulge me, and I was brought up by my mother, of course, but my grandma played quite a bit in it to encourage me and that sort of thing, and I might say she spoiled me rotten. And that as a boy, I had all that I wanted, all I needed. I hadn't a father, and there was a problem. That was a problem. It would have been nice to have had a father, but I didn't go behind on anything. My grandma's and her family made sure that I had.
Any brothers or sisters?
I've got one brother, Pat, who's still alive.
Is he older than you, or?
No, he's younger than me. He's about 5 years younger than me.
What's your...
Well, the recollection of my childhood, that I had quite a strange childhood. I was born crippled, and at the age of 2, I went to hospital, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Hackney, which is quite a distance obviously at that time, and I went into there for an operation, and I then came out, and I had to go in again at 5 for further operations. So the early part of my childhood was a little bit constrained really in that, but after the age of 5 and 6, I started to pick up, and and certainly when I reached the age of about 8 or 9, I joined in the pursuits of a Tilkey boy. The main place that we used to play was the Ladle Meadow, right at the end of Tilkey. It was a meadowland then with quite a large oak tree, which unfortunately has been cut down now. And all our summer holidays and a lot of our other holidays were spent there. We used to go camping there. We used to fish in the brook. The favourite fish which we know as a cocky red star, and we used to go and fish and play in the brook. We used to dam the brook. And any Tilkey boy will tell you that we had the expression of moor pug, where we used to go along and get covered in mud doing this. But and we'd take a tent there, and we'd take a sandwiches and a bottle of rig, and that was a regular feature every Sunday, every holiday day, and go there. Other times, one of our other sports was we used to build trolleys with old pram wheels and a plank, and we used to put them down, run them down the Lamb Hill, and that was quite dangerous. But at that time, you could forecast how many vehicles would be come up there. There'd be Einkoop's lorry, which would come once a week to service the lamb with beer, Tilkey lamb there was, and then there would be Nichols mineral water van to bring the mineral waters to the pub, and that finished it. The other vehicles would be Goodman's coal cart, which was a horse and cart, and there'd be the doctor's car. There was at that time we had Dr. Moffat and Dr. Cameron in the town. There'd be their car, and Mr. Walter Cowland, who kept the lamb, he kept the lamb for 50 years,
And did he have a car?
He had a car, yes, and it was like royalty when Walter came up driving his car, and other times there'd be Mr. Young the vet would turn up in a little open-topped Austin 7. He used to drive very, very slow and cautious, and us lads could run and keep up with him, much to his consternation. But if you take those, that was the main vehicle of traffic that we had to contend with in Torquay. Anything else was quite exceptional, really. And so if you've seen those, you knew that the roads were virtually traffic free, and you could enjoy your games.
Were you allowed to play on a Sunday?
No. Sunday, my parents, my mother was very strict on Sunday. I used to have to go to, we had to go to church on Sunday morning, and Sunday afternoon it was Sunday school in St. Hall. And Sunday evening, we used to have to sit round the radio with my granny and listen to the church service there. And after that, the main recreation on a Sunday, my grandmother wouldn't allow it until the church service had been and gone, was to go into the front room where the whole family used to sit round a piano. One of my aunts was quite a good pianist, and I had an uncle who had got a good voice, and they used to play, and we used to sing all the old songs and ditties of the day, and that was our entertainment. There was no television, the radio was small and crackly, and that was
there a cinema in those days?
Oh yes, we had the kinema down the street here, and I suppose I was about 8 or 9 before I started going down there. I used to go down to what we used to know as the Tuppenny Rush on a Saturday morning, where you used to go down there to cost it tuppence, and there was special films. If the adult film showing wasn't suitable for children, it wasn't shown. You had something else, and one of the characters who came out from that at that time, the manager was a Mr. Maitland de Lacy, and he had a son who I knew quite well, and they lived in St. Peter's Road. But occasionally, Mr. de Lacy, who was a very accomplished violinist, would play his violin, which didn't go down too well with the Tuppenny Rush and that, but it may have gone down well with the other clients. And a unique feature about the kinema was it had a tin roof, and if it rained, you had a dick of a job to hear the soundtrack of the film, and it would break down every so often to the usual boos and catcalls, but generally it was high-tech entertainment as far as we were concerned that day. And one thing that sticks out in my mind about the kinema, in Coggeshall House, where Lord Newton lives at the moment, there used to be a lady there called Lady Gunton, and every year she used to entertain the children to a film show at the kinema. That was attractive because we were all given an orange and a packet of sweets at the same time. And the first school I went to was the church school in Stolen Street, and then I passed at 11. I passed my 11 plus.
Do you remember the teachers at the church school?
Yes, read them very, very well. One there was Miss Hayward, who was there, who was one of my form teachers. There was Miss Turner, and a lady, a rather severe lady, called Mrs. Winnie. But irrespective of her severity, she's a wonderful teacher, and but you didn't have to do too much wrong before you were reminded of it. What we used to know and look back on now as what the Mrs. Winnie slap, which meant that your left arm, your left sleeve was rolled up, and you had a couple of slaps on it, and that was the thing. But she's a good disciplinarian. She kept order, and you took it. But she's a very, very good, attentive teacher. She lived in Queen Street, and her husband, I think, worked at King's and that, and so they were very involved with the parish. The headmaster at the time was Mr. Hearn, George Hearn, but everybody knew him as Billy Hearn, and he was quite a good man. But he could easily be sidetracked, and he had one of the few motor cars in Coggeshall, and you'd only got to sort of turn the conversation.
Whereabouts did he live?
He lived in the schoolhouse, in the schoolyard. The house is still there today. The house went with the job, so he lived right on the premises. And within that, we used to use, in the early days and in the lower forms, we never had paper and pen. We had boards and chalk, and there was chalk rubbers, which was a sort of a pad, and the teachers used them obviously for the blackboards with chalk and blackboard. And there was a large tree trunk right in the middle of the school playground, just outside Mr. Hearn's house, and it was a great day when we had to go out there and clean the chalk rubbers. There'd be chalk dust flying all over. We pat the tree trunk and that with it, and that was.
Did you have ink pens?
We had ink pens when we had ink pens after about the age of I suppose the age of about 6 to 7. We had ink pens. We had ink well, and it was a scratchy pen. If you pressed too hard on it, it used to scratch. And but we were taught to write in ink, but pencil was used quite a lot. But actual writing was in ink. Now, Mr. Hearn was very, very pleased with his handwriting, and he put great pressure on handwriting, and he used to do a fancy H, which I think if you look at any of the people at the school during that period, you'll find that they were all right there H's in the form that Mr. Hearn used to teach us to do it. And
how many children were there, do you know?
I should say there was about 200 children there at the time.
And they were separated?
No, we were mixed school. There used to be girls and boys, because there was the boys' school and the girls' school. But at that time of day, we were all together, the girls and boys, and educated together.
And what happened?
When I was about 11 plus, I took the 11 plus, and I was fortunate enough to get a place at Braintree County High School. At that time of day, secondary education wasn't as undemandable so much as it is today, and so it was looked on. My parents looked on as a little bit of achievement, the fact that I had passed by 11 plus, and I then went on to Braintree School, Braintree High School, for the next 5 years.
And do you recall any special friends you made that time, or?
Oh, well, in Coggeshall.
In Coggeshall.
I mean, in Coggeshall, my lifelong friend, who was still a good friend, was Ron Tailsley. Ron and I, we'd known each other, man and boy, and they were good friends. But others came and went, and I mean, there was Ken Potter, who died not too long ago. Ken and I used to sit beside at school and that, and we remained friends for a long time. And
did you get any pranks at all?
Well, not really. As far as pranks were concerned, they were just normal schoolboy activities, and that. Some of the things that we did, I mean, things would be in season. For example, there was a season when you would have a little wooden top and a whip, and you would whip your top down the street from Tilkey Road down to the school, and you'd take your whip into school with you. Another season would come along, would be hoops, and you'd go to the local blacksmith, and he would make you out of about 3/8 rod. He would make you a hoop.
What diameter would that be?
That would be it was about the size of a 26-inch cycle wheel, and you'd have a stick with a hook on the end, and you would run down and bowl that down to school with it, and you'd park that outside the school gate. Nobody'd nick it, but you'd just park it outside the school gate, and that would be there when you come out, and you'd bowl it back home again. But that used to run for a season, which would run for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then you'd revert to something else. I mean, another thing, there used to be a number of us used to go from Tilkey down to the church school, and when I was big enough and strong enough, because I had, as I say, I had the problem with my legs and when I was younger, that'd be the leapfrog season, and you'd leapfrog all the way down. That was quite a vigorous exercise. You were tired out before you got to school, you know. But it was good, harmless fun. You didn't annoy anybody. You might have annoyed the odd cyclist with your hoop if that ran riot and got off your hook and somebody was trying to cycle up Tilkey Road. But that was the only problems with it. You didn't do any damage. But
did you have any difficult, cantankerous people who complained, or?
Well, there was always the odd one or two who complained, who didn't like things and that sort of thing. But it was no more than it is today, and in fact, in lots of ways, most people encouraged you, and I mean, there was plenty of characters in Coggeshall at the time, and certainly plenty of characters in Tilkey at the time, and but they sort of used to indulge us youngsters, and there was no problem at all.
Now, going back before the war, do you remember any carnivals or fetes?
Yes, I've got a photograph somewhere at home now of the carnival, the first carnival I went to, and I was in my pram, so I couldn't have been much more than 2 or 3, and there's the figure of Mr. Michelin. Now that was a figure, today it's still Michelin's logo, of the man all in tie, and there was somebody in this carnival dressed up as Mr. Michelin, and he sort of almost said, I suppose in hindsight, only just said boo or something like that, but it frightened me, and from that time onwards, my mother would always threaten that if I did anything wrong or misbehaved, Mr. Michelin would come after me, and I clearly remember that from that carnival. I say, somewhere in the archives we've got the photograph of that, and that stuck out in my mind. The carnival used to be, that was on the wreck at time, but it used to be in Lakes Meadow and that there, and there was the flower show, and that they always to be on Lakes Meadow and the carnival procession and that. And then I went into the carnival. As I told you, my uncles and aunts used to indulge me, and I went into the carnival dressed as a guardsman. They made me a busby and all a red rig out, and I think I've still got photographs of that about, and and I went into that, and they made me a wooden rifle and that, and I went, and I won a prize, and that was probably the first prize I've ever won in my life, The only other prize that I ever won, being born sort of semi-crippled, I was a long while before I could walk, and certainly longer before I could run in anything, but every August, living in Tilkey, Tilkey Lamb was our focal point. It was the Rovers' return of Coronation Street. Tilkey always looked on as a rural Coronation Street, and Tilkey was the focal point. And there used to be a gentleman who was billeted in Tilkey in the Warwickshire Regiment in the First World War, and every August he used to come back, and he'd come back, and we'd all congregate outside Tilkey Lamb, the children, and the thing was, he'd start off by scrambling a handful of coppers, and we all used to fight and shove and push and those. But he used to organise a sports day for us down on little fens at the bottom end of Tilkey, and at closing time, the men had come out of the Lamb, and they had been to crates of beer and a niner of beer, and they'd take it down there, and lemonade and crisps and that for the youngsters. Well, they used to organise this sports day, and I couldn't run. I couldn't run in competitive running, but they used to make sure that we all got a prize, and so I've been to the 100 yards, I used to have about a 50-yard handicap in front of the rest, and I always say that was the only race I ever truly won in my lifetime, and that. But it was very good, and I mean, this gentleman, he used to come down there, man, his name was Wheeler, and he used to come down every August, and he used to finance this little event himself, and that was one of the
and he was from the First World War?
He was from the First World War. He was in the Warwickshire regiments, you know, of Billerton, Coggesham in the First World War, and he was a member of the Warwickshire, and he got been very friendly with the people that he'd been billeted on with, and
were these games limited to Tilkey only?
Yes, only to, or very strict. Now Tilkey was you only belong to Tilkey properly, a proper member of Tilkey, if you can understand where the junction of Westfield Drive with Tilkey Road to below that, going towards Stoner Street, they were only Tilkey people by sufferance. The real Tilkey person was the person who was born between rather like Bow Bells, who was born between Westfield Drive and the Meadow Gate at the end of Tilkey Road, and I mean Tilkey, we had quite a social life. That was a wonderful place because everybody knew each other and everybody helped each other there. And as for entertainment, I mean on national days, for example, my first recollection is the coronation of King George V. Tilkey had its own event in the street down in Coggesham. They had their event, but Tilkey, we had our coronation mugs, our own Tilkey mugs, and that the men in the Lamb formed the Tilkey harmonica and accordion band, so we had our own band, and on the day we all met out on the forecourt of the Lamb Inn, and the band played with their mouth organs and that, and they played patriotic music. We had a church service. The vicar of the day, there was a sort of, was a locum. We had the church was hadn't appointed a vicar. A new vicar was being appointed, but the vicar of the day come up and he took the church service and that, and one of the catchphrases that us kids always remembered, where he used to he made a little poem, and which the first lines were, "Mary had a little lamb, Tilkey's got one too." And, but from there onwards, we then retired down to the Ladle Meadow, and the only other car that had turned up in the meantime was Mr. Mellon, David Mellon, who the blind man who lived there, and he had a car to get about with. And he'd got a garage, and the garage had all the children were entertained to a tea in the garage, which had been the parents and all that.
Now you were talking actually the coronation of King George VI.
Yeah.
The Silver Jubilee of George V.
Yes, yep. I remember that because that was celebrated in Tilkey as well. We had a celebration, not perhaps as grand as we had for the coronation, but we had that was celebrated, and they had their own committee, and then I think that was the only time in her life my poor old mum was ever on a committee. But they formed the Tilkey Entertainments Committee, and they organised it all, and we had a beaker, a celebration beaker for that, and if you were lucky, you had two, because the people down the town, they couldn't sort of cut Tilkey off altogether, so some of us had the town one, and we also had the Tilkey one.
Your mother, of course, she was left widowed.
Yep.
Did she have to work?
Yes, she worked. She worked at Hollington's most of her life. I mean, her career with Hollington's was a story in itself. Like all young, she left school at 13, and like all young ladies at the time, you'd either got to go into service or do some menial task on the land. But Mum told the story of how she cried so much that she wasn't going into service. So her father said, "No, you are not. If I have to keep you at home, you're not going to service." So she didn't go into service, but she then went to work at Hollington, and she worked there on and off until she retired at the age of 56, and she worked there, and whilst my father was ill, Obviously she didn't work then because she had to nurse my father and that, but then she, just after he died, she had homework where she used to make she had to make trousers at home with it, and I mean that was tantamount to slave labour. You should have to make, at that time of day, you'd make a dozen pairs of trousers from start to finish, and that for the princely sum of 2 shillings, 2 old shillings, and that, and if you were lucky and the line was for Marks and Spencer, so you used to get 2 and 6, but so there was some rivalry to get Marks and Spencer's trousers, and but to do that, you had to put a patch piece in the back and the flies, so the buttons holds the flies. You had to lug everything back down to the factory, and then go and fetch it again. And you'd make them up completely. Then they used to be inspected and then taken back into the factory. Most of the people, a lot of people, did that as outwork, and several people used to have an old pushchair, and they used to put the bundle of clothes on, and then they went down. But after a little time, when the boys got a little bit older, and that, my mother went back there full time and that, and but she was always home at the time when we were never latchkey kids or anything like that, you know. Yes, yeah. The shops, the main one that I recall where I had the most to do with was Frank Shepherd's shop, opposite the Yorkshire Grey, at the junction of Robin Bridge Road, and that, and then a little bit further down the road there was Mr Woodhouse, who was the corn merchant, and my uncles kept chickens, and so as soon as I was old enough to go out and do any sort of shopping, I used to have to go down there and get £7 bag of meal for the chickens on a regular basis, and another time you'd go down and you'd pick up Mr Credwell was the baker. The bakers were there, and but they had a small sweet shop attached to it, and we occasionally used to go there because Mr Credwell, that was he was quite a generous man, and very often you had jolly good value for your few coppers for your sweets there, and they used to be in little triangular bags and that, and you used to go in for halfpence of sweets, an old halfpenny worth of sweets, you know, and that, and they'd get that. But of course the main business there was the bread, which was delivered. That was delivered on a cart and pushed around, a hand cart, and it was pushed around. I mean, and they were very, very good, very, very reliable. Even on a wet night, you know, sometimes it'd be 9 o'clock at night before, on a Saturday especially, when they're busy, before the bread would deliver. But they would keep on delivering bread till every customer had been served. The other one down the street, of course, we went to Woodhouse. Then there was Mr Gazet's, which was down Picknell Strides, which was a sweet shop, another sweet shop there, and a tobacconist, and you'd go there. And then we had Croydon's. Croydon's was a little bit upmarket, and that, more like the Bowtals in Colchester that we know today, and they were wine merchants, but they were groceries there as well. Then of course the other side of the road we've got where Bowman's is now. It was Byham's. Byham's was a fish shop, and it was a fish shop, and they used to sell a little bit of confectionery and odds and ends, and it had a checkered career, that shop. It changed several times. One of the things that small minor scandal of Coggles at the time was people looked at it with horror, and that. I mean, it was to this day and age it was a minor thing, but they used to take, of course, betting was illegal, and they used to take bets there over the counter, and one day the police raided it, and these people went in to place their bet, and they said gotcha, and they all had to go in the back room of there, and in the end they caught about 20 people with the day's catch there and that, and one including the district nurse who was caught as well, but they were all putting their bet on, but they made quite a carnival occasion of it because they hired a bus, and of course them and their supporters all had to go to Whittam for the case to come up, and they hired a bus and off they went. But that didn't stop it. But it curtailed betting. That was a little scandal with that shop. And that. Next door to that, of course, there was Mr. Saunders, the woodcarver there, and Brian, and it used to be nice as youngsters to go. If the weather was nice, his door would be open and you could see him, and at that time of day he had Ernie Prentice was working with him, and you could see him and Ernie tapping away and doing the fine carving. That was quite wonderful. You know, you could sort of just pop your eye around the corner and take an interest in that. Next door to him there was Tommy Austin, the tailor. He was quite a talent, quite a influential man in the place, but he was there. And then where the chemist is now, of course, but it was late now. Then round the corner where the new shops are on the corner there, before they demolished, there was Cook's the newsagent there, Mrs. Cook's the newsagents, and there, and that was quite round. And then going up Church Street, of course, the next big shop was with Jack Smith's, and that. Opposite, the International wasn't there at that time. It was another grocery shop there. I think I'm not quite sure the name of that. Then next door there was the butchers, and the butchers. I mean, the meat was actually killed on the premise, or the cattle were killed on the premise. I mean, it was nothing to see, and cattle had been driven over the Market Hill, and they either went to Brownings to be killed, or to the butchers. It was, I'm just trying to think, the Fosters were the butchers there. The Fosters were the East Street, but it was Mr. Pudsey who was there when I was a boy. Mr. Pudsey was the butcher there, and that, and then, as I say, then there was Brownings the butcher. That was in Church Street, and down the Swan Yard was where they used to be driven. And I mean, there was quite a lot of cattle would be driven over the Market Hill because.
Where did the cattle come from?
The cattle would be. The cattle would be. There was cattle came from the Highfield, which was farmed by the Annis family, Jack Annis, and the cattle were all driven up to Church Street to go to be milked. And so they were driven over the Market Hill, herded over the Market Hill, and they were taken down to what's the name of the place now? Where it's the insurance shop now, but
not Swan Yard.
The yard before Swan Yard. They were taken down there, and I mean it was the insurance now, but it was run by at that time of day. It was run by Olive Dawes, and Olive. That was a ladies' shop there. And also in that same building there was the telephone exchange, which was a manual exchange, and that was run by Mrs. Waitley, and obviously there weren't the numbers there is today. You do, and that you'd say Cockle 1, 2, and things like that, and she would put you through it. It was a manual board there, and she ran up Brownridge, well, where Wainridge was on the other side of the road there, on the going up, and. Then
was he a greengrocer then?
Wainridge was a greengrocer there at that time, and quite a good greengrocer. There was Frank Wainridge. I remember him very, very well, and they were really the old-fashioned type of greengrocer. You don't see that today. Then going up a bit further, we had Gunton's. There was a little sweet shop there, but they also sold oil, and paraffin, and that sort of thing, and. Of course, there were still the odd places where certainly people were cooking on oil stoves, and there was the odd place where still lamp oil was used, and that, you know, gas wasn't 100% universal, and electricity was in its infancy really. In fact, as a matter of interest, my mother's house was the first house to have electricity in Tilkey Road.
What year was that?
That would be I think about 19, my father was alive then, so it must have been about 1933, 1934, and they were the first to have electricity, electric light in that area. They used to do a deal in that, and it was 2 lights and a plug, and so you had a plug downstairs in the living room, and that was from which the iron worked. I mean, nothing as elaborate as vacuum cleaners or anything like that. And at that time, we hadn't even got an electric radio. The radio we got was battery powered, and accumulators. Used to have the accumulators, which were sort of a glass container with the acid in, and they used to have to take that. We used to have to take them down to Tilkey Lamb and that. And Mr. Cowan at the Lamb had a charger, and he charged the accumulators up, and then of course all at once that started to have electric powered radios, and we had our first radio. But initially then we had the old battery accumulator. So used to have that and a big large battery and a smaller grid battery. And
now, Stan, you were at the church school. Did you stay there all the time?
yes, I left there until I left at 11 to go to Braintree to high school.
Oh, you passed the scholarship?
Yes, yeah.
In school?
I left school at 16.
And what?
1943.
So the war has started?
Yes, the war, yes, yep. In fact, my education, we suffered a little bit through the war, because in this area, the Edmonton schools had been evacuated, and amongst them was Edmonton Grammar School, which then shared premises with the Braintree High School, and the high school was bombed. A bomb fell right on the school gate. That's the joy of every child, I suppose, to see something like that. But for us, it was when it was.
Now you were in the cadets at that school?
Yes, when I was 13, we had to join the cadet corps. That was compulsory. Well, you had to have a blooming good excuse. If you didn't join the cadets, you had to sing with the girls. And bearing in mind that there were 3 forms, we needed no school work on a Friday afternoon, only cadet training and military training, and all the girls from the 3 forms used to go to the gymnasium, and they used to have music and singing. And to my knowledge, there was only 2 boys who had escaped the net of the cadet corps amongst about 200 odd girls singing, you know. But I think they had a good time. One of them his parents were adamant that he was going to join the Air Training Corps and not the Army Cadet Force. It wouldn't have to do it. One of them was a chap who claimed he'd got a weak heart, but a little bit of an antidote to that. A few years ago, my photograph appeared in the Braintree and Wyndham Times, and as a result of that, 4 of my old classmates telephoned me, and we made contact. And one of them was the chap who got the weak heart and that. So we all met up and went out to lunch with our wives and that. And when this chap came in, I mean, it changed completely of all recognition to what he was at school, obviously. So we all sat down and traced on our careers to date. And so we said to him, Ken, what did you do and that? God, he said, I was in the army for 12 years. He wasn't fit enough to participate in the school cadet corps, but his immediate job was to join the army for 12 years, where he's perfectly fit and had a career there. But that was that. Oh, yes. What
was the first things do you recall? How the changes that took place?
Well, it was quite gradual. I mean, the first thing I can remember about where war was imminent was when we were fitted up with gas masks. Now, Sach's buildings, which were Barnett's buildings, and they're now Barrett houses in Queen Street, there we all had to troop up there to be fitted up with our gas mask, and obviously the old black gas mask and a cardboard box and a little bit of string. And we were fitted up there, and that made you think, well, crumbs, something has happened. And then the next thing I recollect is the day war was declared. I was saying about Rob Wilton, I suppose, talking like that. But we were in Sunday school at church, for the Sunday school at church, and at that time we always just sit, the Sunday school used to have to sit at the back of the church and near to where the font is at the moment, and bearing in mind there was pews then, and we sat there, and during the morning we saw the Reverend Brown's wife come in carrying a gas mask box. You know what boys and girls are, nice, look at Mrs. Brown. We weren't paying too much attention on the husband, the Reverend Brown, but we saw her go up and have a quiet word in the Reverend Brown's ear, and he then come to the lectern and told us that war had been declared, and that was the first we knew of it. But of course, when you're young, war, you've got sort of fixed or preconceived notions of what it was going to be like, and so we came home, and there used to be a footpath from Tilkey here down, which is Churchfield Road at the moment. There was a footpath there. We came up across those footpaths, and we were looking all the while for aircraft and Lord knows what and that, but nothing happened, you know, and that sticks out in my mind of day one of the Second World War. From there onwards, things started to change in Colwyn. They started to change. I think it was gradual. The main thing we noticed was that people were called up for military service. I had two uncles who were called up for military service, and you noticed a lot of other young men were going. There had been a general mobilisation of the reserve because there had been the Belisha boys. Conscription came in just before the war, and Hall Belisha was the war minister, and there was a sort of a reserve created who were known as Belisha boys, and they were called up first, obviously, because they were like a territorial unit, if you like, and they went, and that took some of the younger men away from College. Then you saw people from around you going. As I say, I had two uncles going, which was quite a thing, and that, and other friends that you'd hear that their elder brother had gone, and that was how, that was the one of the first things that we noticed about it. There was the odd air raid warning, and the air raid siren at that time was I saw an air-driven klaxon, which was outside Birkin's shop at the end of Bridge Street. We hadn't got the modern siren then. That came a little bit later, and that used to be outside there, and that used to sound every so often, and but nobody took much notice of it at the time until I suppose then when the Battle of Britain started. That's when, you know, war was brought to our doorstep. Just prior to that, of course, we'd had Dunkirk in June in 1940, and the Middlesex Regiment came from the beaches to a battalion of them came and was built in Colwyn to reform. They got no transport when they come. I remember as a boy going along the Calvin Road, and I got to the halfway, and there they were all marching down, you know. And when you're young and that, you sort of, like children on a day, we tried to keep up with them as they marched into Coggeshall, and that made us realise, I think, more than ever, well, okay, you know, something's happening here now. And of course, the Middlesex Regiment, they were billeted in housing and that. My mother's had to have two, and I mean, it meant that okay, we had to give our bedroom up, and we had to go and sleep downstairs in the front room. Our bed was moved down there while we had these two soldiers, and they came here, and there was no option. The billeting sergeant came on and said, how many live here, and that, and three in the house. There was room for two more, and there was you see chalked on the door jamb on the brickwork, 2 ORs, 2 other ranks, you know, and that. We were a little bit miffed because Ron Tagley, Ron lived next door, and they had two corporals there. They were staying there. They got a better status than us. Well, they got two privates, but they were billeted there for some weeks. They were quite nice people. We took them to heart and welcomed in as members of the family, really. And that the lecture hall in Queen Street, that was used there as their headquarters and their cookhouse. And there was if you were fortunate that you knew somebody who worked in the cookhouse, there'd be the odd piece of meat which would find its way home and that. But
well, of course, rationing.
Pardon?
Of course, there was severe rationing.
The rationing, yeah, and that would find its way home. But they were only here for about a week. The King's Own Scottish Borderers were here for about a week, and Mum had two bills on us, you know, and we had the problem there. They were really broad Scotsmen. Was understanding them, you know. But they were there. Then, as I say, then after Dunkirk, we had the Middlesex Regiment here. At that time of day, behind the lecture hall, we had a lovely bowling green and two fine grass tennis courts. But they ruined those by digging them up to practice digging slip trenches on them. So Coggis, the loss of that, of amenities, was we lost the bowling green and two lovely tennis courts. And I mean, it's still undeveloped now, that piece of land. In fact, it's another story, but a friend of mine, when we first got married, we had that same piece of ground. The deacons of the church loaned it to us, and we used it as an allotment to keep chickens on. And we had the problem of straightening it all out where the trenches had been there, but it was very fertile in that. But that was, other things started to happen. You had that the Home Guard was formed. First of all, it was a voluntary body, and you had a lot of the old First World War soldiers were in that, very keen. And then it was a little bit of compulsion was brought into it, and you had a lot of the most unlikely soldiers that you'd ever know, people who wouldn't you wouldn't normally associate with being in the military. They joined it as well. I know one of the officers was Captain Palmby, who used to keep the post office. He was one of the officers I remember clearly. But the Sergeant Major was a man called Albert Cowell, who was a comical character in his own right. Albert was. He was a local window cleaner, and he used to speak with a very cultured accent, and he'd been a parish councillor and one thing and another. But he was the first Sergeant Major in the Home Guard, and he used to drill us in the cadet corps as well. But I mean, there was one or two unmilitary people, and I've actually heard them say on the Market Hill. There was one chap in particular who could never keep step. And I don't think I'd better mention his name because he's still got relatives alive. Yeah,
I probably know the man you mean.
But however, Albert had shouted over to the rest of the company changed step. Then he'd have this bloke's name and say, "You will remain as you are." So you had about 50 or 60 people changing step to bring the one into step. And another expression was his, a favourite one with his, that he could see a man change his mind a mile off. You know, I could see you in that. He's a real old-fashioned Sergeant Major, and I clearly remember Albert being in there. But another funny little story with that, in the second phase of it, I was in the cadets here, and the cadets, we'd been issued with 2 Sting guns and a rifle, a 2-2 rifle, and but our Sting guns were better than the Home Guard ones. And when the Home Guards used to have manoeuvres, I mean, the favourite thing was for Coggis to be attacked by the Calvert Company. And when they used to have the manoeuvre, the cadets, we used to go as runners and that. And so we were allowed to carry our gun and that. So we'd take our 2 Sting guns along, and who's ever out running had a steam gun. But of course, when the Home Guard used to see it, ours had got a better butt on than theirs, and theirs had got the old tubular butt with the end piece on. And when the Home Guard used to see ours, they were deeply jealous of it, you know. And another thing too. Somebody had given me an overcoat which had dated from the First World War, and I mean we weren't issued with overcoats in the cadets, we were just issued with a uniform. And this overcoat was miles too big, but it used to keep me warm when I was on these sort of manoeuvre exercises, and that was better looking overcoat than some of the Home Guards had gotten. I used to be quizzed, where'd you get that from, boy, you know, and all that sort of thing. But the funniest manoeuvre I remember with that was that. We were in Woodlands, Mr. Sanson's house here, Dan Sanson's. We were in Woodlands, that was the headquarters and that, and we were being attacked by the Calverton people, and they used rotten potatoes for hand grenades, and we were all going in the gardens, which is where Mr. Sanson's garden is down over that wall there, when there was umpteen of these potatoes were thrown over the wall. And we were dodging these potatoes, and we were ordered to retire to the headquarters, which was the house itself. And we went into that, and it was decided that we'd got to retreat, and we'd got to retreat down Church Street to the headquarters, which was in the Croydon shop next door to the town. Well, we were going down creeping down Church Street in retreat, and that we were going to leave Woodlands to fall to the enemy, and we were met by an officer and a sergeant, and there was the most terrible row you ever heard in the middle of the street. And this was about 2 in the morning, and that because we hadn't got to retreat. We'd got to remain where we were, and there was an argument whether they would go back or not. Eventually, we had to go back, only to find Woodlands occupied by Calverton people from the Home Guard. But it was a little bit of a Dad's Army exercise. In fact, every time you see Dad's Army, you could look back and you can recall these sort of things, and that, you know, that was there.
Do you recall the air raid wardens at all?
Yes, I do, but I didn't know much about the air raid wardens and that. I remember the first ones. Who we had in Cockburn, the first ARP people in Cockburn. I mean, Phyllis was one of the first volunteers that they had, and there's Miss Rose and that, and they used to be in the ambulance section. My uncle Cecil, just before he got called up for the army, he was a first aider with them, and they used to be billeted at Starling-Lees, and they had an old converted ambulance, which was an old Daimler type car with a van body put on it. That was their ambulance. I can remember them being there, and I can remember the air raid wardens as well, because one in particular, there was a chap, Mr. Cutmore, Lynn Cutmore was a warden, and we was at home in Tilkey one night. There was a terrible bang on the door, and if you opened the door, because the doors went straight to the outside of the house, there was no baffle for the light. You had to put the light out and open the door. Yes, so standing in the dark with Mr. Cutmore declaring that we were showing a cheek of light from through the curtains. My mother said, I'm not, and that we show them what we got. We hadn't got curtains. They used to make a lightweight screen with tarred paper on, with a wooden frame. We used to put that straight into the reveals of the window, you know. So there was no curtains showing a cheek of light, but he still would have it that our curtains, we hadn't got curtains, and there was a row over that. And he threatened to summons my mother, you know. But so that was one of my first encounters with an air raid ward. My mother wasn't worried, but us two boys, we were concerned, you know, what they're going to do to your mother, you know, we could see her spending the rest of the war in the tower, that sort of thing.
Stop a second. Oh.
Yeah. The building of the air base was quite a traumatic event for Cockburn, because the main contractors were WC French, and of course with Labour, local people being aware of the war, they employed a lot of Irish labour, and there was quite a bit of drinking and fighting. As a result of that, the streets were fairly lively. I'm not saying that they were all that way, but there was the odd case of that going on. And of course there was lorry after lorry carting ballast up there going through the town, and went on to become operational. And obviously the first aircraft that came there were the Flying Fortresses, and they weren't there too long. They had a terrible mauling there. They had a lot of bad luck. They lost a lot of them. I mean, they were then moved from Earlscown to Bury St Edmunds, and they went out on a raid, and they got a fly back to Bury St Edmunds from rather than land at Earlscown. But over the channel, that they were a bit complacent. They were attacked by German aircraft, and there were 7 of them were shot down on the way home. It was quite tragic, really. So they were the 8th Air Force, and they had a poor old start for their war and their service in England. But it was quite an experience when they did come, you know, because I'd certainly never seen anything like that. But to find that there were Americans here, you know, that was a novelty, a real novelty. It was a novelty for the youngest generation. It certainly was a novelty for the young girls, and it was certainly to some extent for the older generation. But generally, they soon acclimatised. They were very friendly, and I mean, they went in the pubs. They caused no problems whatsoever, and they very soon became a part of their life. And that, I mean, little story, digressing a bit, but I was in the youth club at the time, and every Sunday night, John Moles used to organise a little service there, and the attraction for us youngsters was that if we were lucky, there was a drink and a cake afterwards. Well, more than sort of religious motivation, we used to go for the drink and the cake. And John used to play violin, but this was the first real close contact we'd had on America. The American padres used to come down from Earlscown, and they used to take the part of participate in the service there, or the program that we were doing, and that was we used to have a request. What would you like? Well, we always used to do them justice, and the Battle Hymn of the Republic was a favourite request, and I think I learned that, and word by word in that time, you know, with that. But that was just to illustrate a small part where they were getting involved with the community in that. The canteen, the St Peter's Hall was later converted to a canteen by the American Red Cross Centre. But they'd been here a little while before that happened. That didn't happen overnight, for example. And of course, the hall benefited by it. And I mean, the central heating system that's still there today, that was put in for the American Red Cross, and before the hall had been heated by large 4 or 5 tortoise stoves round the edges of the hall, and they used to hold dances there and things like that. It didn't appeal to us boys, but it did to the young ladies and that sort of thing. And they would also come down and collect the young ladies and take them up for dances on the actual base itself. There were several Coggeshall girls who did marry Americans, yes, over the period of time that they were there, and several went to America and that. One or two came back, but a lot of them just went there and settled down well in America, made good marriages out of it now. But after the 8th Air Force, of course, the 9th Air Force then came, and they brought the Marauders with them. They settled down well, and they flew regular operations from Earlscown.
Do you remember any crashes at all?
Yes, well, not so much with the Marauders. There's one that sticks in my mind, and I think the story's worth telling. And I should add that when I left school, I went to work for the Air Ministry at Earls Cowan, and whilst we were up there, we used to have to work Saturdays and that, all Saturdays during wartime. It was a 6-day week, and on this particular Saturday they'd been out on a raid, and there was one came back, and he'd got problems landing. His landing gear wouldn't come down, and he hadn't been able to shut his bomb doors, and they were hanging open. So they must have decided that what they were going to do was to bail out over Earls Cowan and then turn the aircraft towards the coast and let it fly out again. And it was it did a circuit of the airfield with its reed flares popping out. That was the signal as they came back from any operation. If they were dropping reed flares, they got injured on board, or they were seeking permission to get an immediate landing out of the stream. And he came, so they flew round, and as they flew round, the crew bailed out, with the exception of the pilot. Well, they landed in various areas of Coggeshall, and it's interesting, and here again I won't mention the name because I won't embarrass the family, but one farmer had one land in his field where we were working quite near, and he thought they were Germans, and he went chasing them with a pitchfork, and that only to find that he was an American. And but the plane was then turned towards the coast and flew over. Well, there's a little bit of an antidote goes with that story. A few years ago, the Americans returned to Coggeshall and I was talking to one of the chaps who had come back, and he'd been a captain in the aircrew there, and I asked him if he knew where we could get an old copy of the American Forces newspaper, the Stars and Stripes, where this aircraft was featured in it, and the story was told in full in this paper, and he couldn't tell me that, but when he said, "What do you want it for?" and I told him this story, and he told me the names of all the crew and what had happened. Well, apparently the pilot, he took it out, and he wasn't too happy about his parachute opening, so he opened it in the aircraft. And when he got over the coast, they jumped through the open bomb door, through the bomb bay, and his parachute got caught up. But eventually he cleared it, and he landed with half a parachute. But he confirmed the story, and he told the story, you know, of it going round and what the trouble was and all. He even told me the name, which I can't remember now, of the raid that had been on. Apparently that had figured in the history of the squadron. This particular aircraft had, but that was an interesting little thing. But another aircraft we saw crash up there. There was a Thunderbolt, a fighter aircraft. That was sad, and that brought home to you how precarious life is. There's a pair of these aircraft came in to land, and they were both on the runway, and they actually touched down. Wheels were touched down, but they had made a touchdown together, and they were rather close. So the rear one, he opened up and took off, and he went round the airfield again. When he was over Grinstead Green, he just fell out of the air and was killed. And I think there's a plaque in Grinstead Green Church to commemorate this pilot there and that. And another one we saw crash up there, which was quite spectacular, was a Flying Fortress. They used to take off, and they used to take 2 to 3 hours to assemble before they got into formation to go on the raid. So they'd circle round, and you could see them up, and they gradually gain height. But this particular day, one broke off, and as he came over Earls Cowan with it, dropping his flares, he got one prop fell at effect. He got one engine to go on down, and as he flew over, the second engine went. So he joined the circuit and to land, and he came in over Wychwood and over to that end of the runway, Wychwood off the Cowan Road, and he came over there, And as he got over there, his other engine had gone, so he's 3 engines down, he's coming in on 1 engine. And then just as he started to line up on the runway, the 4th one went, and he dropped like a stone into a little farmhouse off the Cone Road. And the crew all got out, and they got hold of the farmer there. I don't know what the gentleman's name, I used to know his name, but they got hold of him and carved him off, and they got to the burn pane when the bomb load went up. It was very, very spectacular to watch. Bearing in mind we stood on the perimeter track and we could see all this happen, and there was a mighty roar as his bomb load went up. But that was quite a spectacular one to watch. There was other aircraft that came in trouble. That was a regular feature of them, you know, coming in trouble. But there were no spectacular crashes. The only other thing spectacular happened was that prior to D-Day, they'd got to practice moving the aircraft onto another station, and the Earlscound Marauders had got to change with another 2 squadrons who were at Dunmow. So they packed up everything, all the ground equipment and Lord knows what. The aircraft flew to and done the switch, and the Dunmow ground equipment came into Earlscound on this manoeuvre. And that night, there was over Coggeshall, there was an aircraft shot down, a Ju-88, and that landed on Earlscound Airfield, and it landed right on the top of 2 Marauders, 2 B-26s and that, and the German crew were killed on that. But another little antidote to that, about 18 months ago, in the obituary column of the Times, there was a story of a judge who had been a squadron leader, and he was the pilot of the RAF aircraft that shot down the Ju-88, and that said that when he was reluctant to claim the victory because having destroyed 2 Allied aircraft in the attempt, he wasn't aware of it. And a little bit after that, there was another obituary, and that was his navigator. So that brought it all back to what that night was. I mean, we were at Torquay when that happened, and of course we had air raid shelters built when the drone was built. They had air raid shelters built in the back garden. But I was standing outside the house at Torquay, and you heard this aircraft come, and there was. You could detect a change of engine now, and then all of a sudden there was a terrific bang, and looking out, you could see a big cloud of dust. At that time of day, the building we got, this estate, wasn't built, and it was pure farmland between here and the church. So you could see it, you could always see the church town, but you see this big cloud of that. And that was the most memorable thing of the lot, was seeing this dust go up. We looked at and said that was the church. So as boys we ran across the church fields to see what it was. And of course there was the tower had been badly damaged, had been cracked from top to bottom, and there was a bit of concern because the Middlesex regiment was still here, and the tower was being used by 2 soldiers as an observation point, because that's the time when everybody was worried about it being invaded. And there was these people right near the observation point. But by the time we got there, they'd got the soldiers down, and they were completely they were very much shaken, but they were unhurt. They'd got away with it all. But the rest of the church, as everybody knows and talked about recently, was very severely damaged. That night there was another bomb dropped from the same load at the end of Beers Terrace.
Oh,
but that was that didn't explode in the evening. That didn't go up till about 1 o'clock the next morning, and then we had landmines, and there was a landmine at the Gatehouse Farm. There was a landmine drop there. Apart from making a big hole, which I think is still there to this day. That's a pond now. That made this hole. And the same night, another landmine was dropped the other side of Coggeshall, just beyond Griggs Farm, and I actually saw that come down because I'd heard the Gatehouse one, and that, and I shouted out to my mother, you know, there's a plane has crashed. I said it's blown up over the gate out, and I said, and somebody's bailed out and they've just gone by. But unknown to me, it wasn't somebody bailed out. It was a parachute mine coming down, and he came down further. Then but there, and of course there was Palmer's farm that was bombed and completely collapsed. The building was collapsed out there. Mr. Bowers was trapped in that. Well, you know that better than I do, Steve. You know that there. But they were the bombs that I actually remember coming down here. But no loss of life. Nobody hurt really. We had a charmed existence for that. You know. PC Lewis was the actual policeman here. Now, prior to that, we'd had PC Goose, but I think PC Goose was only here in the early part of the war. Then Mr. Lewis came along. Wonderful man and a jolly fine policeman. That he was, and he kept everybody in order and kept the place going. Very, very good. We were very fortunate there. The doctor. Well, we had Dr. Moffat, and then we had Dr. Cameron, and until he was called up. He went into the army, and they had an army doctor, and that they were the two principal doctors. I can't remember any other doctors being here apart from those. Was
Moffat left alone then, was he?
Yes, yeah. As far as I can remember, I can't remember him having anybody else there during that period. The vicar was the Reverend Brown.
Brown,
yeah,
yes,
the Reverend Brown. He was the vicar. Yes, yeah. Rather a stern man.
Any other known for any eccentricities or?
No. He wasn't. He was an academic, and he was a good man, but he wasn't the most popular vicar, at least in my eyes. But in the characters, well, there were lots of minor characters about, you know. I mean, there was. I'm very low to speak because there are relatives about today very near. Yeah, but you used to get everybody used to have a nickname, and because the families were bunched up. I mean, there was the Potters, and that, and to differentiate between the Potters, there'd be a name. There was the Everetts. There were umpteen Everetts there, you know, and that, and so everybody had a little nickname, and from that nickname, you were able to identify which branch of the family, Rainers, you know, and you were able to identify who they were. And that. But I say I won't associate the nickname with the family because I think it would be embarrassing for the younger people. Anyway, E-Day was a great day there. I participated. I was getting a bit active in local affairs to some extent during the war because my first experience was I was the youth club representative on the War Weapons Week campaign, and at the end of the war I used to get involved roped in for odd things. I mean, the clear thing, the first thing I remember on VE Day was we had a mile a penny because there was a forces fund so everybody coming home from the forces had a little bit of money to give to them, and we had a row of pennies. Well, I started with the two others started at the Lich Gate, and on the pavement everybody come along, and that we hailed them, and for pennies. I mean, if they give a shilling, you change to 12 pennies, and the idea was to get to. Somebody had started down at Bridge Street, and the idea was two to meet, for the two to meet. We never got any further than Hollingham's factory with our lot. And I'm sure the Bridge Street lot didn't do any better. But that was the start of the E-Day. Then things, we had an impromptu bonfire on the Market Hill. The Barnett family were very here, and they played quite a lot in the town. Knows the Barnetts quite a lot, really. They were there. Old Stan could always get some bits of wood and different things, and they had a tremendous bonfire on the Market Hill.
You burned the tarmac?
Oh, it burned a hole in the tarmac, and I always remember there was the Bright family were here, and Bill Bright was the local milkman, and he had a drum, and that whole day he prayed around Collier banging this drum. by nightfall they'd worn a hole in the drum. And that. But then where the curtain shop is now, Mr. Coral used to keep that. And he sold radios and different things and greengrocery, everything there. But he'd fixed up a PA system, which was quite unique at that time. You know, we'd been all quiet during the war, so we then had dancing on the Market Hill, and that's the first and only time I've ever danced on the Market Hill. But there was a dancing there, and it went on, and of course the pubs were open and that sort of thing, and a lot of drinking went on, and then the people from the aerodrome, the RAF people were there at that time. They'd all turned up, and it was a real grand occasion for Coggeshall, you know, and it was celebrated very, very well indeed, and that sort of thing, and it made all the better by recall that while all the celebrations were going on, a taxi turned up and two chaps tumbled out of it, or come back from the war.
Oh,
yeah. They'd been serving in France, and they'd come back for leave. And that was, you know, they were feted as heroes and that sort of thing. I mean, and that was a very, very good day. The E-Day was, and that. I mean, that was a day to remember, to be part of. You know, I don't remember so much of VJ Day because I'd say I had my call-up papers on that, and I always say that the Japanese knew I was 18 and threw the hand in. The atom bomb was purely coincidental to the occasion, but that was that. But
I suppose there were many sad occasions arising up the war, weren't there?
Yes, there was people, you know. The saddest thing was people who you knew. I mean, a chap I went to school with, a very, very clever chap. He lived around Hill Road, Charlie Newman. And Charlie had joined in the Air Force and had gone as a pilot, and he'd just been promoted to pilot officer and flying officer. And then flying officer when he was shot down. And Charlie, we used to go on a little old bus to school, a little 20-seater bus, and Charlie would sit on the back seat with us youngsters. And do our homework for us and all things like that. And we had a great feeling for Charlie, you know. He was a wonderful chap. But he went, I think that of the people that I remember dying during the war, I think I remember to this day, and in fact, you know, when you stand on the down by the War Memorial on Remembrance Day, whenever they read the names, I can see him now, you know, that. He was a jolly nice chap and that, but he was one of them, you know, you heard about other people and that, but you had no real close knowledge of them. You know. I was called up, I was called up the day that the VJ Day. I was just on 3.5 years.
3.5 years. Well, you had to resume your career. What was that?
Well, quite frankly, I hadn't got a career to resume. But during the force, while I was in the forces, we were encouraged to do certain educational training. Quite frankly, I hadn't got a career to resume. But during the force, while I was in the forces, we were encouraged to do certain educational training, and I'd been training or studying for the civil the higher branch of the civil service, and I was going into customs and excise, and we'd done all this work there, and the RAF educational branch were quite good, and we used to get time off from work to go there. I mean, that was only just sitting in and this and that with a sergeant and that, but you almost had one-to-one tuition, which was quite unique at the time. I was sent for with the CEO, and he wanted my name to go forward for a commission, but I thought about it. I mean, it would have been a wonderful career opportunity, and I often wonder whether I did the right thing by coming out. But however, when my mother was home, I didn't think that was the right thing to do. So I got 84 days leave to come. Well, at that time of day you would soon get fed up with cockle. After 2 or 3 days, the novelty when you come home, you've been home away about 3 years, everybody, how are you, Stan, all that sort of thing, and you played yourself back in the wicket again, looked up old relationships and that, but soon got fed up. So I thought, and that time of day I used to like a pint, and my RAF pay was 56 shillings a week as a corporal, and so that wasn't a lot even then to throw about. We'd offered a job on the Crab and Winkle at Calverton as a length man, and it didn't pay a lot of money. I was looking at that, but that was going to supplement my RAF pay with that. So off I went and joined British Rail. Well, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I only stuck it for 3 weeks. I couldn't stick it anymore. But it was like working in a Will Hay film. And if anybody had filmed that today, there'd have been a basis for a damn good TV comedy. And that it was
Crab and Winkle, that is the railway line from Calverton to Tollsbury.
Yeah, there was a single line, and that it was made to bring back the fish and the fruit and that. But the people I worked with had been on it for years, and they resented a young man like me coming on because they got all their perks. And there was another ex-serviceman joined as well at the same time. I mean, their perks used to consist of, at that time, the rails were in chairs, and the chairs, they were held into the chair with a wooden block. Well, this was summertime, and the blocks would dry out and fall out. So one man had to take a large hammer, about a 14-pound hammer, and he used to walk from Calverton to Tollsbury, knocking in all the loose blocks. Another man had to walk from Calverton to from Tiptree to Calverton, doing the same exercise, and come back on the train. But the Tollsbury one, he was in charge of the rabbits. So he'd go down and he'd lay snares along the line, and then on his next day's walk, he'd pick, if there'd been rabbits, he'd pick all the rabbits up and collect the rabbits together. And it was blackberry time, and he'd also find time to pick blackberries. Indeed, the rest of the gang, we used to supplement his blackberry picking as well. And so we'd go down, and the engine was with a single old tank engine that was a little bit bigger than Thomas the tank engine, and that, and with an old sort of a thing like I always called a caboose, an open guard's van on the back, and where the brakeman used to sit. And having got all the wares together, and if any fruit trees overhang the line, they'd pick the fruit as well, and they'd box these up, and the train would be coming along, and they'd see them come along, and they'd wave it down and that, and the guard would then stop down, and they'd pick up all that we'd got to flog and put it on, and that would go to put on the up line to go up to the market in London. But it wasn't just a question of stopping it. It was they'd always, on a Monday, they'd always discuss the day how Colchester United had got on the previous Saturday, and sometimes the fireman and the driver would get down, and the guard, and they'd stand there, and all the in the middle of no man's land, and all the passengers were sitting there while all this was going on. However, the next day it would come back, and they'd slow it down wherever we were working, and there'd be a little parcel, a little packet thrown out, and that was the previous day's takings that come back. It didn't amount to much, but that was beer money. And the ganger of the day always used to make a point that by lunchtime we were either near Tolson, Darcy, or Inworth, Holt, down to, or near, so that we were near a pub. But we'd all be working what passed for work, and he would then sort of, he wouldn't tell us what he was doing, but he'd prayed off about 12, and like a herd of sheep, we used to follow him and get into the pub. And they'd get in the pub, and and they'd sit there and a pipe, Lord knows what. Then 2 o'clock, the gang would come out with a turnip watch out of his pocket, railway standard issue, and he'd look at this and said, as high time we got back. So back we'd go, and but that was the cue to get your knapsack out and sit on the side of the line and have your lunch. But then by 4 o'clock, it was time to go back again. They used to have a little device, a little motorised device that you used to have to switch on the line, some Heath Robinson bracket idea where you could put it on and swing it off the line, and that for when the train came, or you used to park it in little bits of mini sidings all down the line, and that. But it was absolutely chaos working there, and after 3 weeks, I thought, well, I've had enough of this, you know, and that it wasn't what I'd sort of looked like spending the rest of my career with. Of course, one thing was that the engineer in charge of the gang, he used to have to walk the length, but his area stretched from Marksday to Cambridge, so he'd got to walk it on foot, and he used to come along with a gauge in arm to make sure that the lines were apart, and they got a little bit of a spirit level on that the camber of the line was all right, you know, and the lines were laid on old cinder dirt, ash, and that. So they used to move a little bit, and he'd come along and mark them on, and when he'd mark them on, that was the cue for us to have to go and straighten the line up, which you did with blessed great crowbars, and on the command heave, everybody used to heave it, and the line had moved about 2 to 3 inches to get straight again, while the ganger laid on the floor and looked down the line and got it straight. But so once it'd been, you knew you wouldn't see him for another 6. They knew it wouldn't have for 6 weeks. I didn't stop there 6 weeks. I said him come back. But one of his visits, he saw me and he told me that what a wonderful career I've chosen. That I wasn't the least bit convinced. But in the meantime, you'd have to go to Hamilton House in London for a medical examination. So I mean, why on earth you want a medical examination for anything like that? I don't know. But I went up and I was given an official pass with much ceremony to have a free ride to London, Liverpool Street and back. And I went to Hamilton House. I walked in and I saw a doctor. So he said, "You're a young man at the force." And I said, "Yes." So he said, "What grade do you earn?" So I said, "A1." And so he said, "Oh, you're all right then." And then he said, "What colour's this?" And he held up a red card. Red. "What colour's this?" "Green." "You're okay." And that was it. I had a day off and a trip to Hamilton to have my medical. So I was then officially passed fit for British Rail after that. But I left that. My uncle who looked after me as a boy, he said to us, you can't go on like this, you know, you've got to do something, make something of your life. So he said, "Why didn't you try Crittles?" So I said, "Yeah, I can go there." I said, "I've only got 3 months and this exam comes up." So I went into Crittles and I started there in the factory, and I was there about 3 months. No, I was there about 2 months, and I had to go and see the personnel manager. There was an old army colonel. He'd been one of the Crittles commanded officers, and John Crittles found a lot of his army colleagues. He'd backed and almost found a job, and that. So Crittles would rather like that. So I went to see him, and just coming out of the force, and I was very polite, and I stood up straight and called him sir and all this sort of thing. And so he said, "What are you doing working on the floor?" So I told him, I said, "I'm only here for 3 months." And there, so he said, how would you like to come on the staff, you see, here? So I said, "That'd be very nice if I've got the qualifications and that." So he said, "You've got the qualifications." So he said, "Would you like to come?" So I said, "Well, if I'm not pushing myself, I'll come." So I went, and I went on the staff. Well, then just after that, I had me notice come to go to Ipswich to take these examinations, and I dressed up, got me best suit on, all ready to go for down there, and then I got cold feet, and I went back to work at Crittles, And that temporary job for 3 years, that took me another 43 years for 3 months, sorry, that temporary job.
Well, of course.
It took me 43 years to finish.
Of course,
Yes, yeah. Well, in Coggeshall, at that time of day, every morning there was 2 double-decker loads used to go to Whittam factory, and there was another 2 double-decker loads used to go to Braintree factory, and there were on the 8:30 for the staff. There'd be, I suppose, about 15 people who on the staff would go there. So I went on the staff, and from there onwards I had a good career with Quirrell. About every 2 years I moved on and gradually got up the ladder, finishing off as a general manager of the Nigerian company and an alternate main board director of Quirrell Hope Nigeria, and that. So I started at the bottom, and I didn't do too. I didn't think I did too bad out of it, really. For somebody who was there just had to suffer sort of temporary job, but I enjoyed it very much, and they weren't great payers, but it was a good. There was a lot of paternalistic.
What time did they have to leave Coggeshall on the bus?
On the bus, that we just leave 7 o'clock. The works buses used to leave at 7 o'clock, and the staff ones we used to leave at 8:30.
Did they do night shifts, sir?
Oh yes, they did night shift. Yes, yeah. But the night shift, they used to have to find their own way there. In fact, in my short time in the factory, I did do 2 weeks nights, and you had to cycle from here to Whittam to that, and but I found that factory experience wherever I went in my career. The fact that I knew what the factory was like, I found that invaluable. That was a good apprenticeship, really, and I mean, especially in Nigeria, when I was running the factory, set there, I could walk around the factory, and if I saw one of my Nigerians not working quite right, I could get on the machine and quickly demonstrate to him how he done, and that stood me in good stead, starting that way. But that was a hell of a long 43 years, but a hell of a long temporary job.
Well, thanks, Stan. You've talked for nearly 2 hours. And haven't just scratched the surface, really.
No.
Anyway, I'll stop it.